There was an evening when my son sat across from me at my own kitchen table and spoke to me the way you speak to someone who doesn't understand much anymore. Slow, careful, pausing between ideas like he was giving me time to catch up. He was explaining why it would be best to plan ahead, why it made sense to get everything in order, why signing certain documents would make things easier for everyone. He said it all with that particular kind of patience that isn't really patience at all. It's management. And I sat there in my own chair, in my own kitchen, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not sadness, not anger, something quieter than both. The feeling of being counted among the things that need to be handled before it's too late. My name is Walter. I am 84 years old. I live alone in the house I've lived in for over 40 years, and I spent most of my working life as a mechanic. Not the kind of mechanic who hands you an estimate and disappears into the back. The kind who puts his hands on the engine, listens to what it's telling him, and figures out what's wrong before he starts taking things apart. That instinct doesn't leave you when you retire. You carry it into everything else, into conversations, into silences, into the way a room feels when something is shifted that nobody wants to name out loud. There is something specific about that kind of patience, the patience that isn't really patience, that a person learns to recognize when they've been paying attention their whole life. It has a different quality than the real thing. Real patience waits without agenda. Managed patience waits for its opening. If you're watching this and you've got an aging parent, or if you're the one getting older and starting to feel it, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't just my story. It's a story that happens to a lot of people who never get a chance to tell it. My wife Dorothy passed 6 years ago. 41 years we were married. She was the kind of woman who kept everything running without making a production of it. The kind of woman you don't fully understand until she's gone, and you realize just how much she was holding together. After she died, I kept the house. I kept the garage. I kept the routine. I'm not a man who collapses easily, but I am a man who notices when the weight shifts. And after Dorothy, the weight shifted in ways I wasn't always prepared for. The house is a pale yellow, 2 stories, back corner lot on a street where most of the neighbors have been here as long as I have. I built the garage myself in 1988, poured the concrete slab with my brother-in-law over one long August weekend. Everything in that garage has a story attached to it. The Snap-on toolbox Dorothy gave me for our 20th anniversary. The pegboard I organized and reorganized about 100 times over the years. Photographs tacked above the workbench. Dorothy, the kids when they were young, a road trip we took out west in a truck that barely made it. That garage is not just a structure. It is a record of who I was when I still had everything I needed. We had a good life. Not a glamorous one, not a wealthy one, but a solid one. The kind built from showing up and doing the work and not leaving things half finished. That's what I know how to do. And when I tell you that the instincts I built over 40 years as a mechanic are still with me, I mean it in the truest possible sense. I still know how to listen to what something is telling me before it breaks down. My son Craig and my daughter Pamela had been living their own lives for years. Craig in another state, Pamela not far but always busy. We talked on the phone. We saw each other at holidays. That was the rhythm, and I had made my peace with it. But about a year ago, the visits started increasing. Craig drove in twice in 2 months. Pamela started dropping by without calling first. They brought groceries I hadn't asked for, asked about my prescriptions, wanted to know about my appointments. Part of me was glad. Part of me that has been doing this long enough knew to pay attention. kitchen. Dorothy was particular about the house. She had opinions about paint colors and which way the couch faced, and why the kitchen window needed to let in morning light. I used to tease her about it. Now I think about those choices every day. The house is exactly as she would have wanted it, because I haven't changed much since she left. It feels right to keep it that way. It feels like a kind of faithfulness. A mechanic learns early that when something starts acting differently than it used to, you don't ignore it. You don't explain it away. You pay closer attention than before, because the difference is usually the clue. I started noticing things. Conversations that went quiet when I came into the room. Papers on my desk that I knew I'd left in a particular order, now slightly off. A look between Craig and Pamela when they thought I was concentrating on something else. A quick look, almost nothing, but I saw it. I've been reading people for 84 years. I didn't miss it. One Sunday afternoon, Craig sat me down and brought out a folder. He talked about a power of attorney, about how it would make things easier, about how it was standard these days for people in my situation. He said people in my situation without flinching. He meant people my age, people who might not always be capable of managing their own affairs. He said it with calm confidence, the way someone talks when they've already decided and just need the signature. I told him I'd think about it. He nodded. He checked his phone twice before he left. Pamela came by the following week and mentioned a senior living community she'd been researching. Said it had beautiful grounds, activities, people my age to spend time with. Said it like she was doing me a favor, like the greatest gift she could give me was a way out of my own home. I offered her coffee. I asked about her kids. And after she left, I sat in the garage for a while, not doing anything, just sitting in the quiet and thinking about what was happening in a shape I could see clearly now. They were planning, and they had decided, somewhere along the way, that I wasn't going to understand what they were doing until it was done. The hurt that comes from your own children is its own category. It doesn't behave like other kinds of hurt. It doesn't stay in one place. You feel it in the morning when you're making coffee, in the afternoon when you walk past one of their old school pictures in the hall, late at night when the house is so quiet you can hear the refrigerator running. It's not just what they're doing, it's that they're the ones doing it. The same people you drove to baseball practice. The same people you stayed up worrying about when they were teenagers. The same people Dorothy loved with a fierceness that I never fully understood until she was gone. That's the part that doesn't fit into any conversation. And underneath all of it, there is something I had never quite put into words before that week. The fear of becoming an inconvenience to the people you have given everything for. The fear that the years of work and sacrifice and presence add up to nothing when the calculation shifts. That what you are gets replaced by what you're worth. I had always told myself I was past that fear. I wasn't. Nobody is. The night I heard everything, I wasn't trying to listen. I had gone upstairs for my glasses and come back down the hall toward the kitchen. The voices reached me before I reached them. Craig and Pamela. Craig was saying the property value was better than he thought, that the timing was good, that there was someone who could handle the paperwork quickly. Pamela said, "But what if he pushes back?" Craig said, "He won't understand what he's signing. We just need the right moment." I stood in the hallway in the dark, one hand on the wall, and heard what my children actually thought of me. Not what they said to my face, what they actually thought. A man who no longer understood. A signature waiting to happen. I went back to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, not crying. I haven't cried in years, and I didn't cry then. I sat in the dark and let myself understand what I had heard without flinching away from it. And somewhere in that stillness something shifted in me, not into anger, into clarity. Because when you realize that someone has fundamentally underestimated you, you suddenly see what that gives you. It gives you the advantage. They think they know what you know. They don't. The next morning I got up at my regular time, made coffee, read the paper. When Craig called to check in, I was friendly and vague, the way they expected me to be. But I had already decided to call Frank Battaglia, an old friend who had practiced real estate and estate law in this county for decades, and who knew me better than most people alive. I called him from the garage, so there was no chance of being overheard. He answered on the third ring. I told him I needed advice, and I needed it to stay between us. He said, "Come in this week." I said, "Tomorrow, if possible." He said, "Fine." Frank is the kind of man who became rare a long time ago. He doesn't waste time on pleasantries when the situation calls for directness. But he also doesn't forget that the person sitting across from him is a person and not a case file. He asked me one question at the end of our first meeting that I hadn't expected. "Walter, what matters most to you in this?" I told him. He nodded like it was the right answer. Then we got to work. Frank didn't treat me like a problem to be managed. He asked me questions and listened to the answers without filling in my sentences or summarizing them back to me in simpler words. He understood immediately what was at stake and what my options were, and he was direct about both. He connected me with an attorney who specialized in elder law, a woman in her 50s who had seen this kind of situation many times and who had the precision and the practicality that I responded to. By the end of that week, I had a plan. By the end of the following week, we had begun executing it. I moved carefully. I kept my demeanor exactly as it had been, still receiving their visits, still listening to their suggestions, still giving them no reason to think anything had changed. While they were planning around me, I was working beneath them, quietly and methodically, the way you approach a complicated repair when you know the engine, but haven't found the exact problem yet. You stay calm. You don't rush. You let the work tell you where it's going. The house was placed under legal protections that made any transfer of ownership without my notarized in-person consent not just difficult but impossible under state law. A portion of my assets was restructured and redirected toward purposes they hadn't accounted for. A charitable trust in Dorothy's name, directed to an organization she cared about in the years before she died. My will was revised with a clarity and specificity that left nothing to interpretation. Everything was documented and filed. Everything was done. A mechanic doesn't get to be emotional about the problem. You can feel what you feel, but you put it aside while you work, because the feelings don't fix anything. The clarity does. The steadiness does. The willingness to work through each step without skipping any of them because you're impatient to get to the end. That is what I brought to those weeks, and it was enough. Before I go any further, I want to ask you something. If you found out that the people you trusted most were waiting for the right moment to take what you'd spent a lifetime building, what would you do? I don't mean what you think you should do. I mean what you would actually do when you were sitting alone with that knowledge. Put it in the comments, because the answer says something real about who each of us is when it matters. About 3 weeks after Frank and I had finished everything, Craig came by again with another version of the same documents, reworded in places, a little smoother in its presentation. He sat down, started explaining. I let him finish. Then I said calmly and without any particular drama, "I've had everything reviewed by an attorney. It's all been taken care of." He looked at me the way people look when something doesn't register. "What do you mean, taken care of?" "The house, the accounts, the documents, everything that needed to be in order is in order. He asked what attorney. I told him Frank had connected me with someone qualified. He set the folder down slowly, like a man who has just been told his map is wrong, but hasn't quite figured out what that means for the rest of the trip. Pamela called the following afternoon. The attorney had sent a formal letter outlining the protections that were now in place. Pamela's voice was tight in a way I hadn't heard before, a controlled kind of upset that was trying to sound like concern. She said she didn't understand why I hadn't talked to them first. She said they had only been trying to help me. She said there must be some misunderstanding. I let her finish. Then I said quietly, I heard the two of you talking in the kitchen. I know what you were planning. There was a long silence, the kind that comes when there's no prepared answer. She said she could explain. I said I didn't need her to. I wished her well and got off the phone. Craig didn't call for over 3 weeks. When he did, his tone had changed in a way that was hard to describe but easy to feel. Something had gone out of it. He tried to revisit the conversation, to suggest that things had been taken out of context, that he had always wanted what was best for me. I listened. I said I believed he once did. I said that what I heard that night told me something different. I said that I still considered him my son, but that some things had been made clear that couldn't be unmade. He didn't have an answer for that. We ended the call politely and without resolution. The visit stopped. For a while I expected them to start back up once everything settled, but they didn't. The house went quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. After Dorothy died, the quiet felt like absence, like something missing that should have been there. This quiet was different. It was the quiet of a decision made and a line held. I found I could live inside it without falling apart. That surprised me. I thought it would be harder than it was. I still go out to the garage most mornings. The old Snap-on toolbox is still there. The photographs above the workbench, still there. Dorothy's face in the one from the road trip, the year we drove out to see the canyon and had to stay an extra night because I couldn't get the truck to start. I fixed it eventually, the way I fixed most things, by paying attention and not giving up before the problem showed itself clearly. I look at that photograph sometimes, and I think she would understand what I did. I think she would say I did it right. I am slower than I was. My hands don't do everything they once did. I need more time in the morning before my back stops complaining about the night. But none of that changes what I am. And none of it changed what I was capable of when it mattered. That is the thing I want whoever is watching this to understand. More than anything else I've said, this house is not for sale. Not because I can't make that decision, because I have made it. There is a difference between a thing being beyond your control and a thing being a decision you have made with full understanding. I know which one this is, and no document that anyone else drafts, no moment that anyone else engineers, no assumption that anyone else makes about what I can or cannot comprehend changes that. I am not bitter. Bitterness is for people who believe the wrong done to them defines them. I don't. What I did in those weeks after that night in the hallway, acting carefully, choosing deliberately, protecting what was mine, that defines me more accurately than anything that was done to me, and I can live with that. What I leave behind is not just a house with the right paperwork. It's proof that reaching a certain age does not mean surrendering your right to decide. That a quiet man with slow hands and a methodical mind can still outthink a plan that wasn't made with any respect for him. That patience, real patience, is not the same thing as weakness, not even close. I'll leave you with this. At what point does a person's age become the only thing people think they need to know about them? Because if you're still thinking about that question, you're probably asking it for someone you love or for yourself.